exceptions like in India or France, we are seeing the birth rates declining below that magical 2.1 figure. And this has got some enormous implications for a variety of countries around the world. And I'm going to try and explain why we are moving into this very precarious environment. This is the normal population pyramid. So the population pyramid of China that we've seen in the 1950s, you know, young at the bottom, the older individuals in the population at the top. But if we take a look at what happened throughout the ages, the one-child policy began here in the 1970s, and suddenly we started seeing an unbelievable decline in the population pyramid of China. There's an estimate, some forecasts, that even estimate that the Chinese population will halve by the end of the century. So this means that China is going into a post-industrial phase far quicker than other economies. And this also would lead to a decline in their consumption base. More about that a little bit later. Japan is already there. So we've already seen a post-industrial society emerging in Japan. And the scary thing, if we take a look at Europe, so if we take France out of the equation, a rapid decline in the population size of the youth over the next few centuries or next few decades. And this is really worrying. And the reason why is because of the foundation of our current economy. We are seeing that this isn't solely linked to Europe or Japan or China, but literally a worldwide phenomenon except Africa. So what's really important to realize is this, is that you need affluent 25-year-olds to drive the world economy. Was there any question at this point, Manolo? I just thought I'd heard a question coming in.
No,
so,
nothing, thanks.
What's really important to realize is this, that we are looking at an environment where the rich world is having far less kids. So the developed world is looking at the demographic death spiral in decades ahead. And the importance is that our entire economic system is based on Keynesian economics. So Keynesian economics, the whole foundation around creating a demand and then pulling through all supplies through the value chain. So in a number of economies, your consumption makes up close to 60 to 70% of the GDP of that country. So consumption is a really important part of the economic realities. What happens, however, if your 25-year-olds start declining? Well, it's very important because the 25-year-olds is an indicator of the consumption patterns in the decades that follows. At age 25, you get married. Then once you get married, you get kids. And boy, then it's spend. You buy a car, you buy a new house, you buy a starter house, you upgrade your house. You buy a car, you get a family wagon, you get kids, you buy computers, you buy telecommunication packages, you take the kids to school. So your 25-year-old is an indicator of the next 20 years of economic expenditure. So literally the consumption economy is based around the number of affluent 25-year-olds. As we grow older, we start spending less. Normally at about age 45, we reach peak expenditure. And then after that, we go and spend money on hospitals and cruises and retirement homes. That's normally the pattern. The problem is that in big parts of the world, the 25-year-olds are drying up. And this means that the idea that our economies will grow based on expenditure will decline. And that's why we've put peak consumption as a very important headline. And we anticipate in a variety of countries in Europe, as well as in the US, that we will reach peak consumption by the middle of this decade, 2025, 2026. And then it'll become extremely difficult for our stock market to keep on growing because the consumption simply wouldn't be there. So word number one, peak consumption, and we anticipate that to turn by about 2025. Word number two, realpolitik. What does that mean? Now let's go take a look at a couple of news headlines. Look at this interesting news headline. The United States is seeking to impose sanctions on a Russian pipeline putting or leading to energy into Europe and specifically Germany. So why the hell would the US impose sanctions on a Russian pipeline. Let's go and look at the story behind the story. So in the whole idea of realpolitik, the world of Richard Nixon and Kissinger, where they said, let's take the world as it is and try and understand what these political decisions are based on the current realities. Realpolitik 2.0 is literally what is happening in the world of energy security on a global basis. If we take a look at Europe, we see that an enormous amount of countries are heavily dependent on Russian energy flows into Europe. Here you can see that countries like Hungary, Slovenia, Austria, gets about 60% of their gas from Russia. The problem was that the major pipeline went through the Ukraine, and we all know what happened with the Ukrainian politics. And there were two new pipelines that are now hoping to feed energy into Europe. The one is the Nord Stream pipeline coming through the Baltic Sea, and the other one is the Turk Stream pipeline coming through Turkey. Let's show you what is happening in that ecosystem. So that's the two pipelines, the Nord Stream pipeline and the Turkish pipeline. And our question is, why would the US bring out sanctions against the Nord Stream pipeline? Oh, well, let me show you why. If we take a look at a night photo of the United States of America, we see the Bakken Formation. Oh, here we have Minneapolis and St. Paul and Chicago emitting a tremendous amount of light. And 20 years ago, the Bakken Formation was completely dark. The light you see there is literally gas being flared, being burned, because the fracking revolution in the United States has got gas as a byproduct. But there's no pipelines, no storage facilities, no commercial utilization of gas in the US. So what do? They burn it. And a number of politicians in the US would idly like to take all of this gas that they burn, put it into pressurized shipping containers and ship it off to Europe. That's the idea. So here's what's happening. We are literally seeing that the fracking revolution in the US is making the US energy independent. Yes, they still need to import some oil from the Middle East because of the grade of the oil. But as a net exporter, the United States don't need a military fleet around the world to protect the energy supplies anymore. They literally are becoming self-sufficient as far as fracking is concerned, specifically at a price point above $50 a barrel. The problem is that they cannot make as much profit from this initiative due to the fact that they're flaring so much gas. So what they're trying to do is as follows. So here's the argument. The United States is saying, why do we need to pay for the troops that is stationed in Germany or in Europe to protect you against the Russians, but you buy your energy from the Russians rather than from us? Interesting question, isn't it? And this is leading to a very interesting trade war that the US might say, I'm not going to buy any German or European cars unless you buy a larger share of exports coming from the US. And one of them will be gas. So it's really important to realize that America is slowly but surely pulling back from the rest of the world. Their military deployments are declining. There's also a cost issue related to it. The far left and the far right, none of them want America anywhere in the world anymore. They believe that they're quite safe and no one's going to attack them. Why the hell should they be the policemen around the world? We're seeing a slight change under the Biden administration. But nonetheless, we are seeing a slow removal of America from a variety of flashpoints. And one of them is the Middle East. So talking about gas, we've seen that Israel in the last 2 or 3 months have opened up diplomatic relationships with Turkey and with the UAE and with Saudi Arabia. And the question is why? Literally, the Middle East is repositioning itself in a post-US or post-Bretton Woods world. What's really interesting is, yes, not only did the relationship between Turkey and Israel open up wonderful territories in the sea for both Turkey and Israel, it also gave Israel sole utilization rights of the Aphrodite gas field, which Cyprus claimed as part of the initiatives. But now with this new relationship, Israel can harness that oil field far more effectively. Traditionally, the plan was to have a relationship with Cyprus and then ship it through Greece into Europe. But the financial implications of the project, it simply didn't make sense, building their own pipeline. But by creating a strategic relationship with Turkey, Israel can still harness that massive oil field or gas field and pump it into the existing pipeline that Turkey has built called the Turk Stream pipeline. So all that energy coming from Azerbaijan and Baku can now be augmented by the gas we're getting from Israel. And this is how the geopolitical game is changing in a post-Bretton Woods world. So that's word number 2. Let's take a look at word number 3, trade routes. We've all seen what happened with the evergreen shipping company that blocked the Suez Canal. Yes, these are the critical choke points. One of them, the Strait of Hormuz, because if a shooting war breaks out between Saudi Arabia and Iran, then a large part of the world will be starved from fuel. Also, the Suez Canal, a critical point, and then the Strait of Malacca. So let me quickly show you what the various countries around the world is doing in a post-COVID world to optimize the trade flows, perhaps in a world where they might not get the protection from the American armed forces to the extent that they had that benefit of in the past. One of them is this interesting little pipeline built in the UAE. Why have they built a pipeline from the gas fields close to Qatar to the other side in the Gulf of Oman? Very simply, to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. Because what the long-term agreements with China would link to is that the Chinese can load their oil without going through the Strait of Hormuz. And that is why this specific pipeline has been built. In the work that we're doing with the UAE, another interesting opportunity came up by looking at the amount of energy flowing through the Strait of Malacca, another critical point, adding 4 days to trade flowing out of China and 4 days from energy shipments going through the Strait of Malacca into China. A very interesting solution might be to cut, yes, you guessed it, taking the Belt and Road Initiative one step further and to cut a pipeline or a canal all the way through Thailand. So we anticipate that in the next decade, a huge amount of pressure or the opportunity will open up. On the one side for Thailand, to start opening up oil refineries on their western coast and then having a pipeline going to the eastern coast, which means that you can get ships from the UAE or Saudi Arabia delivering oil into Thailand, refining the fuel, and a ship on the other side of Thailand picking up the fuel from a pipeline and taking it into China, literally cutting 4 days out of the journey. Or alternatively, opening up a massive new canal to bypass the Strait of Malacca. The impact on Singapore will be enormous, but it will literally cut 4 days out of trade flows out of China, as well as the energy being shipped into China itself. So another very interesting opportunity to use canals to make the world far more efficient. This is an interesting one, word number 4. Now, Manola, maybe this is a good opportunity to open the floor for any questions. If there's any questions, I'm more than willing to field them because it talks to demographics and geopolitics. And then if not, I will continue into the economic sphere, talking about the current fiat monetary system and how that might change in the future. Are there any questions or comments at this point in time? Manola?
Nothing that's been received here right now. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an opportunity to ask Pieter directly a question. But Pieter, what I do want to ask you, you were talking about the real politics and the fracking revolution and the impact that it's having on the global economy. It was very one-sided at one time with the Trump administration, but with Biden, and you did mention to some extent that there has been a shift on that. What kind of a shift are we expecting? Because I see that Biden is now working closer with Europe and trying to build those relationships that had been eroded in the past 4 or 5 years.
You're completely correct. Specifically after the Biden administration stopped the pipeline coming from Canada, this was a huge concern. And, the energy independence of the US were in some way affected by the pipeline from oil fields in Canada or the tar pits in Canada. But the fracking revolution per se would be more than sufficient to sustain the US. I think that Biden realizes that America beating its own drum might not be that beneficial if specific countries like China is given free rein in the South China Seas. And I think more it's the strategy of containment rather than American expansion.
Okay. Peter, I see that a question has come from Johan van der Walt. How does the situation in northern Mozambique influence this oil energy scenario?
There's a huge amount of interest in Mozambique in order to harness those gas fields. But to be completely honest with you, it's all over the place. We are seeing gas finds in the Mediterranean basin. So I don't think it'll have a huge impact on global energy security. It will, however, have a huge impact on the prosperity of the Mozambique citizens and the companies that are involved, because they might not be able to harness that, harness the benefits of that energy find. It is a concern. I know that the US is currently looking at bringing in special advisors in order to train the Mozambique team. I also know there's a reluctance on the point of South Africa to get involved, because they're also worried that this might flow over into terrorist attacks within South Africa itself. So in this case, it makes a lot of sense for the US to act as an advisor, because the reaction against them might not be that severe from the terrorist groupings within that environment. I think that the Center of Security Studies might give you a far more nuanced answer than I provide. I don't have in-depth information around exactly what's going on there. All I know is that we are currently in an environment where there's a glut of energy, specifically under COVID-19, as we use less. And therefore, I don't think that it'll have an impact on oil prices, but it will have a negative impact on the revenue streams of Mozambique itself. Hopefully that makes sense.
And sorry, just a follow-up, according to Johan, what about our involvement in SADC free trade environment? Because this whole thing is just very close to home.
It is. I think South Africa will have to tread carefully. Unfortunately, our security clusters in the country have been severely degraded under Zuma's administration. So our ability to truly understand what's going on and to order to influence that environment has been severely constrained, as we simply don't have the capacity to truly interact with that challenge. Our trade directly with Mozambique, I don't think will be affected hugely, but we have to be careful that this doesn't spiral out of control. And that's the key challenge that I think everyone in the region is worried about.
Thank you, Peter. We can continue.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, Fiatism, it's got nothing to do with an Italian car manufacturer. It's got everything to do with the way in which the current world order is structured. The current world order was built on the foundation laid in the late 1940s with the Bretton Woods Agreement, where the United States of America said, with most countries around the world being decimated by the Second World War, America was the only country that retained its manufacturing base. And it opened up an opportunity for others to stand in front of it against the Soviet Union. America kind of bribed the allies and said, what we will do is we'll put the dollar forward, we'll link that to the gold standard, you can link your currency to the dollar. We will guarantee that the dollar is interchangeable with gold, and then we will also guarantee the freedom of the seas, and all energy purchases can now be done on the dollar basis. And a variety of countries recovered very well after the Second World War. Germany, Italy, Korea, Japan, China as well. And this led to a very beneficial trade agreement between the various countries that aligned themselves with the US. And with the fall of the Soviet Union, the Bretton Woods kind of stopped mattering, because, the purpose was done. For America, it was about security. The rest of the world, it was about trade. And we started seeing that this Bretton Woods agreement started fracturing. Another very important thing happened on the 15th of August, 1971, when Charles de Gaulle wanted the gold that was linked to the dollars that they invested in the US Treasury. And Charles de Gaulle called the guys in the US and said, listen, I'm sending a warship out. I want my gold back. Meanwhile, the US were busy with their exercises in Southeast Asia and Vietnam. So that's where all their dollars were. And at that point in time, Nixon then delinked the US dollar from the gold standard. in 1971. This opened up a real debate. What is the foundation behind money and who creates money? And there's this fallacy that the central banks of each country prints money. That's not really true. Here's a very interesting quote taken directly out of the Bank of England's report. And it's quite fascinating to know that most money in circulation is not created by the central bank, but most money that is created by commercial banks, mainly the primary dealers. In most economies, there's about 4, sometimes 5 major banks, and they create money. How do they create money? If a person would come to them and say, I want a loan, or I want to build a house, or I've got a big rail project, then the bank would literally create money, give that as capital to build this project, but then over a 20-year period, utilize that to pay back the loan that they created. After 20 years, the loan account is closed and the bank makes a profit based on the interest that the parties have paid. So the income stream and the revenue model for banks is to sell money. And that's literally what they do. Their real income is the interest that you pay on the loan. And therefore, banks see, with all honesty, sometimes the assets as liabilities. The real benefit is you having to pay them a monthly fee. So based on your credit worthiness, you literally create the lifeblood of most banks. So money is created and then destroyed as the loan is paid back. However, in the last couple of years, normally the banks would then loan, they have this overnight repo rate. If one bank requires money, they would get it from someone else, but only if they trust that the assets that you hold is of value. So a bank would say, you hold my assets for a day, you give me money, and after I get money to pay you back, we'll swap the two around. That's the overnight repo rate. And we've seen huge fluctuations, specifically last year, in the overnight repo rate. And the central banks were really worried that there would be a liquidity crisis. So the amount of money in the system wouldn't be there due to the fact that people don't trust the valuation of certain assets. So ever since 2008, when our previous financial crisis had to implode and a new one had to arise as a phoenix out of ashes, we kind of kept that old system on life support. And the way we did it is to enable central banks to not only purchase government securities, but by buying the securities of the primary dealers and even of companies. And that's what we call quantitative easing, where the Reserve Bank then takes the assets that is normally a long-term loan and liquefy that with real cash or debt monetization. So converting debt into money. And that is where the freshly printed money comes from. It is the Reserve Bank printing money as they buy the long-term debt of the banks that in essence would have only been paid back 20 years from now, but the Reserve Bank is now creating a larger liquidity. And this in its own is creating a misallocation of resources. And that's the key concern. That's why the term fiatism, because a lot of people say capitalism is the problem. No, it's not. Capitalism is about the efficient allocation of resources by the market itself. That's capitalism. What we are seeing now is that this extra amount of money being pushed into the system creates this massive bubble of liquidity. And this means because money is so cheap, we get an incorrect allocation of assets and funds. And that's really the key problem. And this has got some very interesting or long-term impacts on social cohesion and on our economic fabric. Let's quickly give you some statistics. Ever since the US were decoupled from the dollar, we've seen that the GDP growth was there, but the amount of debt just went skyrocketing. As this Keynesian economics of let's print more money with a hope that it will pull supply through the value chain and then lift our economy, we've seen that it only worked to some extent as our debt started running away from us. We're also seeing a couple of very interesting changes in the velocity of money. So the velocity of money is how often a currency unit circulates through the economy. And in normal, very healthy economies, we get it between 10 and 12 times a year. We've seen that the velocity of money is falling off a cliff. So there's a huge amount of money that's in our system, but it's not going anywhere. It's not circulating through the economy. It's staying within the financial sector. It's not being circulated. And the only thing it does is to boost asset prices. So huge increases in share prices, in real estate prices. but it's not going through to the real man on the end of the street, which means that the velocity of money is literally falling off a cliff while asset valuation is being artificially inflated. And that's what I mean with the incorrect allocation of assets. We've seen that I took a picture this morning. A year ago, the United debt, or the US national debt, was 22 trillion. So a trillion, if you count it in seconds, is 33,000 years. It's not a joke to be smiled at, but that's the current debt. But that's not the problem for the US. The biggest problem is this unfunded liabilities of 162 trillion. It's money that they should have put aside to pay for pensions and for medical aid for people that are retiring. But guess what? They said, no, don't worry. Tomorrow's taxpayer will somehow magically give us that money. I've just shown you that we're going to reach peak consumption by 2025. The future taxpayers are not going to be there to pay back this loan. Key problem. And that opens up this entire debate around the future of money. Just to give you an idea, the cheap money, as I said last time in my presentation, the cheap money in the system allows companies to buy back their own shares because the cost of capital is so cheap. What happens? You bring back the number of shares that you have in the market. Because there are less shares in the market, your earnings per share goes up because there's less shares. Yes, your profit stays the same, but because you have less shares in the market, your earnings per share goes up, which means your shareholders smile and your CEO smiles because of the nice bonuses that are being paid out. And because of that, we're seeing this massive increase in asset prices. What impact does that have? Well, one of the impact is that in most countries, normally the stock exchange is publicly traded companies, and it's not the private companies that are not traded. So the whole economy is only 50%, publicly traded companies. Now we're in a situation where the stock exchange on its own is 3 times higher than what it was in the 1980s in terms of valuation compared to a country's GDP. Doesn't make sense anymore. Inflation, if you think inflation is 2 or 3% a year, well, then you realize that the governments have got 2 types of definitions of inflation. Real inflation is far higher. And because of this increase in asset prices, the amount of money in the system, as well as inflation, it means that subsequent generations are no longer experiencing the same lifestyle than their parents had. And here's a very interesting scenario to highlight that fact. So these 2 decks show you when a generation hit a certain age, what percentage of them owned a specific asset. So on the right-hand side, that you'll see that when the baby boomers hit 35, 30% of them owned a house. Generation X's, guess what? Only 20% of them owned a house at age 35. Look at the millennials. Only 4% of them can afford a house. This means that if you're in a relationship with someone, both of you have to work, and then you still struggle making ends meet. And if you struggle making ends meet, the last thing you think about is having children. And this just leads to this demographic death spiral, where these countries that have a misallocation of assets, where we have huge asset booms, and only those that have share prices and real estate really benefit from it. Those that work, they literally find it more and more difficult to make ends meet. And because of that struggles, the last thing they think about is starting a family. So this is literally this post-industrial society we're heading into. And this also feeds into this idea of peak consumption. Okay. So what are different countries around the world doing? Well, one of them is they're bringing out their own programmable currencies, their own digital tokens. Let me explain where this comes from. This is the town of Würgel in Austria. And Würgel had that experiment called the Miracle of Würgel. And what they did was they didn't utilize the national currency. They created their own debt note to act as a currency in the town. But there was an interesting difference on this, because for you to maintain the purchasing value of this note, every single month you had to pay money in order to activate the note once more. So that meant that this note declined in value over time. And what this meant is no one wanted to keep it. So you get the note and you give it to someone else, but you don't want to keep it until the end of the month, because then you are the sucker that have to pay the 1 cent stamp duty on it. So why do you want to do it? We'd rather give it to someone else. And this meant that the velocity of currency went ballistic. I mean, where normal currency in a country would circulate 10 times a month, this thing or this note circulated 300 times a month. And it led to economic boom because you're being paid by this funny piece of paper, which all of us are, being paid with funny pieces of paper. But the fact is that you had to pay a fee at the end of the month to retain its purchasing value. You wanted to get rid of it as quickly as you can. So the velocity of money just went ballistic. And this lesson of demurrage might become part of a reality around programmable currencies. We've seen that China is busy with the experiment on the digital yuan. We're going to see this in other parts of the world as well. But this is the important thing and how it's going to work. So let's, for example, say the stimulation checks that is being put out by the United States. What prohibits anyone to take that money, put it below their bed and not touching it or putting in the share index? Nothing. So you want individuals that get money to spend it in the economy. And one of the ways you can do so is to deduct money from that amount, because digitally you can put a tax on money if someone don't use it for the correct purposes of the government. So for example, if you purchase goods from a non-green provider, there could be an automatic tax of 2% built into your transaction. So do you buy something from someone that's not net zero? Then that might be an inherent tax within the payment mechanism because your currencies are now programmable. Or if you get a stimulus check from the government, they'll say you need to spend at least 80% of it. And they can measure that based on the interaction of this currency with other players in the market. So this brings an element of government control over how you spend your money. And in reaction to that, we are seeing the cryptocurrencies that is independent of governments. But in the 1930s, the US outlawed the ownership of gold. We might see interesting scenarios where governments would try to outlaw the utilization of Bitcoin in purchases. It's going to be an interesting debate, but nonetheless, I've already purchased my popcorn to enjoy the show on the sidelines. Then another very, very interesting opportunity coming up in terms of technology is mRNA. What the hell is mRNA? I want to share with you a brief video to explain. It's a 3-minute video, but it's very important because the new vaccines, the Moderna vaccines specifically, is built around a brand new technology called messenger RNA. And that holds an unbelievable key for health and prosperity in years ahead, where we can harness the messenger RNA in our bodies to create certain proteins that will be beneficial for us. I hope you bear with me. There's a 3-minute video that explains how our DNA and messenger RNA and proteins all work together to ensure that our bodies are nourished and that we can get the right medicine. Let me share the video with you.
Here is a cell, the basic unit of all living tissue. In most human cells, there is a structure called the nucleus. The nucleus contains the genome. In humans, the genome is split between 23 pairs of chromosomes. Each chromosome contains a long strand of DNA, tightly packaged around proteins called histones. Within the DNA are sections called genes. These genes contain the instructions for making proteins. When a gene is switched on, an enzyme called RNA polymerase attaches to the start of the gene. It moves along the DNA, making a strand of messenger RNA out of free bases in the nucleus. The DNA code determines the order in which the free bases are added to the messenger RNA. This process is called transcription. Before the messenger RNA can be used as a template for the production of proteins, it needs to be processed. This involves removing and adding sections of RNA. The messenger RNA then moves out of the nucleus into the cytoplasm. Protein factories in the cytoplasm, called ribosomes, bind to the messenger RNA. The ribosome reads the code in the messenger RNA to produce a chain made up of amino acids. There are 20 different types of amino acid. Transfer RNA molecules carry the amino acids to the ribosome. The messenger RNA is read 3 bases at a time. As each triplet is read, a transfer RNA delivers the corresponding amino acid. This is added to a growing chain of amino acids. Once the last amino acid has been added, the chain folds into a complex 3D shape to form the protein.
And there you go, ladies and gentlemen, the process around how proteins are formed in your body to nourish your body. And one of the important things about the new vaccines that we've seen in COVID-19 is that companies have tried for years to get the mRNA procedures and medicines into general use, but there was always a resistance from the medical community because of the lack of research and the lack of historical evidence. And under COVID-19, there was this urgency of getting it done. And suddenly messenger RNA were embedded in the early vaccines that showed very, very promising results. So we do believe that messenger RNA, and one of the positive benefits of COVID-19 will be that messenger RNA will become more and more mainstream in the treatment of disease. Very interesting one. Another video, Manola, I've got 2 words left. I've got quantum X and hybrid work. Hopefully I'll be able to finish that off in the next 6 minutes. But hybrid work will be very important. We are seeing that in a number of capitals around the world, offices are standing empty. People are saying this new COVID-19 have inaugurated a brand new way of working, where some of the days you will work from home and some you'll work at the office, but hybrid work will be key. And what we are seeing is that a variety of companies, specifically Microsoft and others, are looking at new technologies to limit the distance between us and make telepresence a completely different reality. Welcome to Microsoft Mesh.
Connection is a spark that gives our lives meaning. It drives us to seek out others who feel the same way.
Okay, why don't you input the data and we'll take a look together. Hey Mari, what you got for me?
To find those who share our views, yet offer different perspectives.
Saw this net. Look over here.
Challenge us with new ways of seeing.
That I think we should
deepen our understanding. And enrich our lives.
最后一笔的时候，往前。
Great things happen when we commit to something bigger than ourselves.
Let's take a closer look at it.
Place this here. Let's see how we go from there, okay?
This sense of collaboration and the feelings of connection it brings excites us.
Hey, just in time. I'm gonna move it slightly, okay?
It's yours, take it.
We have 2 planes right now on the same trajectory.
As we put people first, technology fades into the background and feels like anything but.
Aisha, what do you think?
I think if we had 330, maintaining 2800,
we'll be clear for approach.
Excellent.
This changes the way we see the world, and in turn, changes the world we see.
These numbers are looking great, actually.
There's promise in the possibilities, and what we see and create next will stretch the imagination.
Good morning, Sarah.
Morning.
Slowly coming towards the thumb.
A world without boundaries.
Good job. A lot better than yesterday.
Yeah.
Excellent. Slowly bring the
A world where technology enhances, not limits, humanity. With people front, center, and in the spotlight. The future is here. And here can be anywhere. Introducing Microsoft Mesh.
So, ladies and gentlemen, just a disclaimer, that is not the future, it's the current, it's the here. In a number of our courses at the Institute, we do it in VR goggles. And then 30 people sit in one virtual class so we can see each other's avatars. I stand in front of a classroom and I give a presentation and I can give them high fives and they can see them when they put their hands up. No more a computer screen like this, a unidimensional focus, a multi-dimensional environment. Then suddenly you take your goggles off and 30 people are gone. But the fact is that it's here and now. The devices are sometimes quite expensive, like the HoloLens, but also quite cheap, like the Oculus Quest. You can buy those goggles, high-end goggles, for $299. So this is where we're heading. Another important thing is the cybersphere. Yes, you guessed it. Companies like Amazon has brought out a technology called Sidewalk. The problem with any tracking technology is the battery life. The moment you communicate over 5 or 6 or 7 kilometers, your battery life severely degrades, or you only have to send small little bits of information. What Amazon have done is to allocate technology to all of their equipment, their cameras, their speakers, making small little areas available around the speaker, a distance of about 1 kilometer. And this means that those batteries in any device can last for 10 years, 15 years. The nice thing is that you are able to track your device via this neighborhood link of connectivity. So that means that the battery challenge is overcome and you can utilize your neighbor's Wi-Fi hotspot to figure out that your dog walked past. So literally a whole new ecosystem, and yet security is built into this entire fabric. Fascinating technology that enables us to literally connect the world. Talking about connecting the world, another key element of the cybersphere will be the nano satellites that zoom above us. Yet there is no thing like escape altitude, only escape velocity. But the closer they are to the planet, the quicker it needs to move around the planet, not to be attracted by gravity. But that means there must be a multitude of satellites that'll zoom past, and the moment the one is gone, the other one is there to pick up its location. That means that the next generation of satellite communication will be satellites between 80 and 100 kilometers from us, not the 33,500 of our existing geostationary satellites. And the last word. Now, Manola, I've run out of time. I've got one word left. It's called Quantum X, but it's tough. It's a tough one, and maybe we should leave it till later. What is your verdict?
Tell you something, Peter. I always remember the first lecture you gave at the UNISA Business School, and it was amazing. I thought you were talking about something that was really not genuine, and I'm living all of it now. And now you're talking about this, and you talk how you have different meetings, and you all use your goggles or whatever. And this is not my field of, expertise. So I really can't talk about it, but I feel.
Can I borrow 5 more minutes to finish?
Of course you may. Please. No, please. Yes. And let's talk about Quantum X. Yeah, please.
So Quantum X is quantum and whatever. So thank you, Manola. I do apologize for interrupting you. I just wanted to finish it, and then I'll hand back to you. So when we talk about quantum computing or quantum cryptography or quantum radar, what do we mean? Let me give you a quick introduction. If you take 2 particles, let's say 2 photons, and you entangle them, we call it quantum entanglement. But the moment you entangle them, we don't know in what direction they're turning. Is it a horizontal or vertical, or how? Well, what is the state of the other particle once they're entangled? The interesting thing is we can remove these particles from each other and they are still entangled. And then I can look at this one and I don't know what its state is, and the other one I'm going to send to Mars. And the moment someone on Mars looks at that particle, this one's fixed. It's like weird. We call it, Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. This is where you entangle 2 particles that keep on being entangled. And the moment an observer looks at one particle, the other one, irrelevant of where it is in the universe, then is fixed. Fantastic technology. Let me show you what they've done at the University of Vienna. So hopefully the representatives of the Austrian consulate are here. But at the University of Vienna, here is a a summation of this subatomic world, showing what happens when two particles are entangled, and the moment the one is changed, the other one changes in unison with it. An unbelievable element of physics in the subatomic world. And what we are seeing is that more and more and more applications are emerging where we are harnessing this fact of nature that is even today not fully understood. So that is a quick indication where the one is a diagonal and the other one is horizontal. And you can see as the one changes, the other one changes in unison, although they are removed in time and in space. So this is literally the spooky action that you see appearing in front of you, utilizing quantum entanglement. So you might ask yourself, where can I use quantum entanglement? Well, one obvious way to use it is information security, because let's say I can send my information to you in an entangled pair. The moment someone intercepts my communication with you, then I know that someone is eavesdropping. You see, I can send two particles and they're entangled. That's that blue linkage between each one of them. And two parties will accept it and accept it as a valid key to encrypt today's data. So instead of just swapping out a key once a year, we can swap out keys on a daily basis, meaning that someone's not going to crack our keys today. And the mere fact is that we entangle the keys means that we are ensured that no one else has eavesdropped to look at our encryption keys that we are sending out. Let's say eavesdropper, Charlie, sits here and intercepts any of the packets. The moment they do, the entanglement is broken, and we will know that our information has been compromised, and we will then use an alternative way to exchange keys for our daily interaction. And most of the banks has already implemented this here in South Africa. Another interesting environment is, yes, you guessed it, stealth aircraft. And how does radar normally work? We send a radio signal, and what bounces back from the radio signal helps us to determine if there's an aircraft or not. But with stealth, the signal doesn't bounce back. So what do? We use quantum entanglement. We entangle two particles. We take one particle and we send it into space. And as long as this one isn't changing, but the moment this one's fixed, I know that it encountered something on the way into the skies, and now I know that it bounced against something, and that means I can detect stealth aircraft using quantum radar. Welcome to the world of Quantum X. Just some brief insights into some of the very weird things that we predict in years ahead. This wouldn't have been possible if I didn't utilize a variety of resources on the internet. I've looked at the United Nations report, The Economist, Real Vision, Pieter Geldenhuys, the Caspian report. All of these provided me with very valuable insights, and just a word of thanks to them for assisting me in getting all the content together to share with you some interesting headlines in the world of the future post-COVID-19. Manolo, over to you.
Pieter, thank you very much for this. As I was saying before, it was so interesting that you spoke about a very different future, which I'm living today. And this was many years ago at the UNISA Business School. You've now taken it a step further, and you start talking to us about this Quantum X and the hybrid workspace. It is something different. We are living it right now. And ladies and gentlemen, I really want to open the floor to all of you, and just feel free to send questions, or even put up your hand and ask Pieter directly. Pieter, people are saying brilliant presentation. Thank you. Please carry on. But yes, any questions from anyone, please? In the meantime, I'm going to ask you a question, Pieter. You towards the end of this, you started talking about security and living in the future. Everyone's security seems to be more fragile. Organizations have a lot of money, and banks and big conglomerates to protect themselves. How can we as individuals, I know that Google Map knows where I am all the time, during the day, etc. Security is going to become an issue for all of us in the future. It's an issue now, What is there to protect ourselves as individuals, never mind corporates?
Manolo, we'll have to look in the mirror. What's really interesting is that the Girl Scouts, the Girl Scout initiative in the US, have now got a certificate for getting your kid to put up a firewall on your home router. So, in the past, you could tie a knot, climb a tree, go sailing, and you get a certificate for that. Right now, the Girl Scout movement in the US is showing the girls how to secure your home router by putting a firewall on it. So if your 8 or 9-year-old kid can put a firewall on something, maybe it's time we start learning from them. So firstly, get a teenager to put a firewall on your home router. That would be a good one. Start utilizing virtual private networks on your devices. When you use a virtual private network, especially if you're in an open area, there are literally dozens of these, and even a couple of free ones. I use TunnelBear, for example. But that means that whenever I am in the open internet, in a coffee shop or so forth, I always encrypt my communication, so that otherwise I would put a Hack5 pineapple down and I can actually extract all of the data and find out what you're visiting, what you're doing, and even what you're typing on your messages. So use virtual private networks. If you're a large organization, start thinking about integrating some quantum cryptography keys that changes on a daily basis, rather than waiting for a quantum hack on your keys that might have detrimental impact. And then, on a personal basis, please don't use the same password for your bank and for your email. Please don't do that, because if you utilize one password to hack into or to sign into other programs, then if that is hacked, someone knows what your password is on other domains. So just be careful with and I'm not saying create a new password for everything you do, but as far as your social media platforms, your email and your bank is concerned, make sure you've got very strong passwords.
Thank you. Peter, there's two questions. Right.
Yes.
First one is, how does this keep on with all these developments, what you've been talking about? And then the second one is, what is your view on gold? Is crypto now taking over as the future currency?
Very difficult. Let me do the first one. Keeping up, read Economist magazine. That's one way of doing it. There's a variety of wonderful articles in there. Sign up to YouTube channels. There are some fantastic YouTube channels up there. Maybe in the middle of the year, I'll start with headlines from the future YouTube channel, and then I'll let you know, and then you just subscribe to that, and then I can keep you updated with developments. So the social media environment will literally open up really interesting opportunities. So, anyone in the call is welcome to contact me. I can put them in contact with the sources that I'm following, and I'm more than willing to share that with them. Then in terms of gold has been so to be completely honest with you, the valuation that we have in our society is only based on mutual agreement. So, on the islands of Yap, they had these massive rocks that were an indication of wealth. And if it was too difficult to carry, you put your name on it, but you would be a wealthy person if you own a large rock. So, how's that different to gold? Gold is just rock lying somewhere. But the entire world recognizes gold as a store of value. And therefore, normally in times of crisis, the first thing that drops is gold, because people sell gold quickly to get out of short positions because they know it's one of the most liquid, most trusted assets there are. We are seeing that cryptocurrency is making a call for it. They're saying maybe a cryptocurrency that is limited, specifically Bitcoin, because where other currencies, even if it's a government-backed currency, we are seeing that they keep on printing more of the stuff. And people are saying, hold on, what is the value of a currency? If we take a look at the US dollar, 20% of all dollars that were printed into existence emerged out of the Fed last year. Last year alone, more than 20% of dollars were created out of debt monetization. But I'm still trying to get my head around it, because if this loan book is closed, does it also mean that the dollars need to be extracted from the economy? And some are arguing, no, over time, the economy will grow to justify this amount of money that we printed. Somehow the amount of debt out there and the economic growth don't gel anymore for me. So I believe there's a lot of people that are saying, Cryptocurrency is a very easy way to exchange value between individuals outside government control, and it's more a correct allocation of assets. And more companies are now using that as payment. We are seeing that investment funds, pension funds, even companies like Tesla is offering the sale of goods utilizing cryptocurrencies. What the future holds, I don't know. You know, cryptocurrencies has been with us for 10 years. It's never been through a massive deleveraging where assets have lost a lot of value. I don't know how it will react. I don't know if anyone knows. So there is a move for cryptocurrency to replace gold because of the ease of use, but we still have to see what the longevity of it will be after we've gone through a variety of economic cycles. Only then will cryptocurrencies truly prove their worth after the market have tried to rip them apart or not, to see how robust or resilient they are in the face of adversity.
Thank you, Peter. Fernando, I see that you are online. Would you like to ask Peter a question? Okay, it doesn't look like it. So, ladies and gentlemen, one last opportunity for one more question. Okay, so Peter, thank you very much. As always, this was so interesting today. And ladies and gentlemen, we will be sharing this video with you. And we thank you for attending this webinar today. And we hope to see you again soon. Have a good day all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for the opportunity, Manola. A wonderful day to the rest of the audience. And thank you for taking your time out to listen to us. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Manola.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. Keep well. Stay safe.